Vale, bueno, pues la siguiente charla va a empezar ahora. Es Afry Curiel, Senior Narrative Designer. Y ya está, yo me callo.
Hola. There we go. I'm not sure if I want to sit down or not. I'm not used to sitting down, so I'm going to stay up. Keeping my options open. Hi everyone, I'm Afry Curiel, and this is Narrative Design Beyond Words. Been a bit cheeky with the title of this talk. It's a bit clickbaity. I'll explain why in a second. But first off, I'm Afry. I've worked on games like Greece, Anno 1800, and until recently I was a Splash Damage, where I've gotten to work on projects like Transformers Reactivate, Project Astrid, and some very cool unannounced projects. Some people here may remember my early days in the industry. I used to give quite a lot of talks about narrative design theory. So when I was invited to talk at Guadalindie, my first instinct was to try and find a cool narrative design theory topic to talk about. However, something I learned quite early in my career, especially when I started working in bigger teams, was that it doesn't really matter how well you know your theory, how much you know your stuff, how good you are at your job. If people don't know what you're for, if people don't know when and what to listen to you about. So that's what I want to talk about today, about what the actual job of the narrative designer is and how their integration within the team is incredibly important to their job. I consider many different titles for this talk. This is kind of an evolution of a talk that was originally called Holistic Narrative, because I watch Dirk Gently and I really like that term, but I don't think a lot of people know it. I considered How to Take Care of Your Narrative Designer, or something like Survival Guide for a Narrative Designer within a big team. Briefly considered Please, for the love of God, let me do my job. I settled on narrative design beyond words because I thought a lot of people are going to come to that. Oh, they're going to learn how to design narrative that is beyond words. No, actually, that's the major preconception that we have to fight in our job every single day. Our job goes way beyond words. So in this talk, we'll talk about why narrative design is a bit of a hazy topic, a bit of a difficult thing to get your head around, to communicate what it actually entails. What I believe narrative designers actually do, and why being integrated within a team is actually really essential to doing a good job. This talk is for anyone that's starting out in narrative design, so you can kind of understand what's going to be expected of you. Whoop. Some crazy feedback happening. Oh, there we go. So you can maybe know like what kind of skill sets you should work on developing, how to communicate with the rest of your team. It's also for people who work with narrative designers. I'm going to talk a lot, like Lou said earlier, I'm going to talk a lot about the mutual trust with everyone in the team. So in this talk, I'm going to teach anyone who is not a narrative designer but works with them why it's important that they listen to them and they understand their job. And hopefully there will be some good takeaways for already experienced narrative designers, maybe helping you explain to your team why they need to listen to you, maybe even just knowing that you're not alone and you're not insane. So chapter 1, the hazy subject matter of the narrative designer. When we talk about the subject matter, the area of work of each of the roles within a team, some of them are a bit hazy, of course, like there's producers, but some of them are really clear-cut, I think. Like a character artist probably is going to talk about, be concerned with the art of the characters, right? An engine programmer is going to mainly focus on programming the engine, unless they have to do like gameplay programming in there. but it's quite clear-cut. Like a level designer will be focusing on the level, the combat designer will be focusing on the combat, and then the narrative designer focuses on the narrative. What is what is the narrative? Like if you ask people, what do you think narrative is? Most of them will tell you the story, I guess. There's plenty of games that don't have stories, so do you still need a narrative designer for them? Like, guess if you have like, I don't know, like characters that give you tutorials and stuff like that, you probably need someone to write that dialogue. If you have missions, if you have items, I guess it's kind of like writing and story, so I guess words, kind of? Does that encompass it? And writing in itself includes a shit ton of skills. There's the skill of actually stringing words together nicely, choosing the right word in the right order. That's an incredible skill that not every writer has. There's the skill of designing a plot, a character arc that's really engaging, that speaks to someone. There's world building. There's the skill of designing a speculative world that's rich in texture and actually makes the player believe that they're there. There's all sorts of like theme, tone, pace, readability, style. All of those skills are part of being a writer, right? Not even just narrative designer, just a writer. And in our line of work, many times we're also expected to understand voice acting, mocap direction. But is that all? So when they invited me to Womanize in 2019, there was Valentina Tamer. She was a narrative designer on Candy Crush. And she spoke pretty much about the same thing I'm speaking about right now. I've seen many narrative designers saying the same thing. That people usually expect narrative design to be about writing text and plot and dialogue and tutorials. And in reality, they said their job is very decision heavy, very collaborative. It's about using all of the elements that compose the game to create a narrative experience. Narrative experience, I think, gets a lot closer to where we're trying to go. But still, what is narrative? What composes the narrative experience? I've done this thing that I absolutely hate doing, which is, okay, I want to know what people think narrative is, so I'm going to check different definitions on the internet to see what people actually believe narrative is. They will say, story, 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 a series of events. So we're going in circles. It wasn't story, it was narrative, but now it's back to story? So what is a story? Is, again, an account of events? Again? We're going in circles. So I put up there one of my favorite ways to summarize what a story is. It's by Jon York in his book Into the Woods. Just somewhere, a series of events occurs to someone. And that already gives us, in that very concise sentence, the main elements that compose a story. The what happens, who it happens to, where and when it happens, and why those things happen. In other words, the characters, the motivations, the plots, and the setting. Those are definitely the job of a narrative designer. But still, I don't know, I haven't played Candy Crush all that much, but I don't think it has a plot. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think it has like kind of like mascots that every once in a while pop up and give you a little quip on like what you need to do. And maybe they have like a specific voice, but is that a character? Is that a setting? I don't know, it doesn't quite convince me still. So I have a thesis, and there's a little hint in here. I believe the better way to explain what a narrative designer does for a game is the concept of fiction. I think the concept of something that we pretend, something that we feign with our imagination is the better way of thinking about the role of a narrative designer in video games. After all, it's the thing that I believe separates games from sports. Is that element of you're pretending to be in a space that is not real. You're pretending to inhabit an imaginary space. So chapter 2, what I call the fictional experience. I believe the term of fiction is really interesting to explain what we go through when we play a game. Because these experiences come from imaginary spaces, right? They come from things that are not real. And in many ways, you can have those fictional experiences arising from the story, from the characters. But if you've played Flower here, Flower doesn't need any characters, barely any story as far as I remember. It has like a theme, but it doesn't really have a story. But it uses game mechanics, it uses the environment art, it uses sound design and music to make you feel the fictional experience of being a current of air carrying lots of flower petals. That's not a story, but it's a fictional experience. In most games, everything comes together. If you've played Celeste, you felt the stress and fear of being chased by your own shadow. Everything is coming together to give you that fictional experience. So just to do a little, because I love this, this side of our job. Our job is to make people feel things. But why do people want to feel things? Like, most people would prefer to feel something that is real. Do you know anyone in your life that never reads a book, that doesn't understand why people like movies? How do you explain to them that you like looking at things that are not real because they make you feel a certain way? Well, I would argue, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I would argue that we like experiencing fiction because as long as the fiction is plausible enough, our brain will not distinguish and the same chemicals will be released in your brain. And people like feeling things. People enjoy having a rush of dopamine, having a rush of endorphins and serotonin. If the fiction is strong enough, playing a game and getting attached to a fictional character can give you the same oxytocin as hanging out with your boyfriend. If the fiction is strong enough, going through the streets of Silent Hill can release as much adrenaline and cortisol as being chased down the street. And we like that. It feels even safer if it's not actually being chased down the street. So I argue that our job as narrative designers is create this fiction. And games exist in a bit of a space that touches an Venn diagram of both fiction and reality. And we'll talk about this a lot more in a second. But we simulate a play space, we simulate the actions that the players can take, and we can simulate the reactions that the world has against their actions. But there's also a lot of non-fiction involved in games. If you've played any multiplayer games, or if you've played on the couch with your cousin Mario Kart, winning and losing is a very real interaction. It doesn't happen within the fiction of the game, but it happens through the game. Even the skills that you pick up through playing the game, even the hand-to-eye coordination, even the strategies that you develop, that is actually developing your brain in the real world. So there are definitely lots of things about video games that are non-fiction. My thesis is that fictional side, that fictional experience of the game, is the real subject matter of the narrative designer. So chapter 3, the fiction designer. How do you actually design this fiction? I've kind of boiled it down to 5 steps of how I believe it would be done in a fantastic world of imagination, fiction, in which everything is perfect and happens according to plan. And I will talk about them a lot more later on. But the first thing you need to do is understand the experience that you're going to try and trigger. Are you going to trigger sadness, excitement, fear, love? What is the experience? And I'm obviously being very reductive here. I'm only talking about the feeling that it gives you, but the experience needs to be a lot more cohesive. It's the fear that you get from PT is very different from the fear that you get from Celeste, for example. Then step 2 is actually design what conditions you're going to simulate so that they trigger that experience, that fictional experience in the player. And this is what I'm going to touch on in a second. Step 3, unless you're incredibly talented and you can execute absolutely everything that you've designed, you will have to communicate all of the things that you've designed to the people that can actually execute that. For example, I'm not a talented artist like Lou, for example, so I would have to communicate that fictional experience and the designs to simulate that experience to a talented artist. And they would have to understand that. They will come back to me with feedback of what they can and cannot do, and I will have to iterate. And I think on all of these steps, you will always find new information and new problems will arise that will send you back to step 2. You will always have to keep iterating the design. What you don't want to happen is find information that completely changes your experience, because that is the major pitfall that makes big changes that mean that the game has to completely pivot in mid-development and waste a lot of time. So you kind of want to really find things at the stage, the step 1. But hopefully in a perfect world, step 3, everyone agrees on the design, and you start developing, you start actually producing the assets, you start implementing them, and then you can start testing, checking that the experience that you have designed is actually being triggered through the simulation that you have created, and polish it until you have the best game that you can possibly hope to have. Now, I said I was going to continue to talk about the step 2, and I will talk about the other steps a little bit further in. But we talked earlier about the simulated play space, the simulated actions and reactions. So let's start with the play space. When I say play space, why do I say it like that? Because some games will have an actual level. Like most games that we always think about have an actual level, but think about games like Candy Crush, like Bejeweled. Those games exist in something that we cannot just call the world, right? Those exist within, let's say, like a UI. But we can have those two levels, very narrative keywords, diegetic and extra-diegetic. That basically means diegetic exists within the fiction, extra-diegetic exists outside of the fiction. But everything comes together to simulate the play space. So, for example, the level design, the actual, whether it's 3D or 2D, the actual space that the player can move in, if they can move, all of the art that composes it, the art of the environment, the art of the props that you can use, the art of the NPCs around you, the art of your own character, all of that communicates a fictional world to the player. All the sound effects, everything that the NPCs around you say to you or say to each other, what the lighting makes you feel. Is it really hard to see? Is it really bright and glowy? Even the VFX can communicate lots of stuff, can tell you whether you're in a world of magic and fantasy or if you're in a world of science fiction and cyberpunk. And the extra-diegetic is just as important. The UI is one of those elements that exist very much both on the fiction and the non-fiction. You have the menus of choosing at what level you want to hear the music or what frame rate you want to run the game on. That's very much on the reality side of things. But the menus in which you decide which attack your Pokemon uses, the HUDs, all of that is part of the fiction. It tells you information about the fictional space, even if it's extra-diegetic. And the music, obviously, is incredibly important to create that fiction and create that emotional response in the player. So all of these, and I'm missing a lot of elements, but you can hopefully get a bit of a picture of what I mean by all the elements that come together to design the play space. And let's not forget the actions and reactions. So obviously, games require input and respond to that input. So when I say actions, I mean obviously the game mechanics, the actions that the game's code allow the player to take. Can you speak to people, or can you just shoot them? Can you run? Can you jump? Can you hide? What are the actions that are allowed for the player to actually use within that simulated play space? And what situations do you put the player in to use those actions? What missions do you give them? Do you give them any combats? What type of enemies do you give them, if any? And how do you communicate those things to the player? For the player to be able to use their actions, they need to be able to know that they have them and what to expect from using them. So you need to be careful about communicating those affordances to the player. But it doesn't stop there. The game has to react to the player's actions. So some examples of how the game reacts to the player are, for example, the systems. Does the wall crumble when I bash it with a sword? Or does it just get a light scuff? The feedback that the player gets. Do people die and scream and run off when I run them over with a car? Or are you completely banned from doing that and you just get like a light bump if you go out of the road? If the game has a story, how does the plot evolve? What are the consequences of the player's actions? If there are characters, do they react? Do they have a different dialogue if you choose one action or another? Do you change the world? Do you have to change the play space to reflect the consequences of the player's actions? So these are some of the things that we need to design to create a cohesive fiction. And now the problem comes when you have to explain to the team that everything comes together to design that fiction. So chapter 4, the narrative designer or fiction designer and the team. So this is the main hurdle that I wanted to talk about here. This is the roadblock that I've seen a lot of narrative designers hit, especially in bigger teams, when there's a preconception that we only deal in words. It's why the hell are you sticking up your nose in my lighting art meeting? Why are you concerned with what sound effects we do? Why are you concerned with this? We don't need to ask you about this. But every single choice that's made on what goes into the play space, what goes into the mechanics and systems of the game, will have a massive impact on that fiction that is created. And any tiny thing that goes against that can absolutely destroy that illusion of fiction, can break that plausibility that makes our brain believe it's real and release those nice chemicals. So it's really essential that the narrative designer and the team can communicate to each other. So starting with communication from the narrative designer to their team, here's some things that you can do to make it easier for the team to understand you. So first off, documentation, like Lou already talked about it, is essential, and you have to be mindful of people's time. So you have to keep it as concise as possible, like as respectful of their time and attention as possible. So you need to find a good balance between being thorough but easy to digest. But not everyone will read documentation. And let's be honest, they shouldn't unless they're looking for specific nuggets of information. Most of the information is probably going to be delivered through presentations. So a thing that all narrative designers should work on is their presentation skills, is like getting rid of the anxiety of public speaking, is knowing how to make nice but also fast slides, and how to present information concisely and paint a story that's easy to follow. And that's going to be your main tool to communicate your design to the bulk of the team. You're also going to have to be in meetings a lot. You're going to have to communicate a lot in meetings. And you need to be proactive about them. You cannot just wait until someone drags you into a room and asks you, okay, give me something. You have to know when to call them. So there's two stages in which you should take the initiative to call a meeting. One, when you actually have something to propose, to present, and it's really important to have a really good meeting hygiene and agenda and have really clear next steps that you want to have from that. And when you hit a roadblock, when you found a problem that you cannot solve and you need the input of game design, you need the input of tech art, you need the input from the creative director, it's really important to understand exactly what problem you're trying to solve and be very proactive about reaching out and asking for feedback and direction on that instead of just getting trapped in that perfectionist loop. So all of those levels, documentation, presentation, and meetings, it's also extremely important to have really good interpersonal communication with every member of your team. You want everyone that you work with to know who you are, to feel comfortable speaking to you, to know that they can come to you at any time that they need to. And obviously, it's important also to establish limitations and not let people just randomly get you out of your focus anytime, but just make yourself as approachable as possible and make yourself trustworthy. Make people understand that you're not going to judge them. They're safe telling you anything. There's no wrong questions, and make yourself as available to them as possible. From the team to the narrative designer. So first off, very good job on being here if you're not a narrative designer and you're trying to understand what we do a little bit better, because I think it is essential to understand what we do and how we do it in order to understand how to communicate with us, as it is the other way around as well. But some things that you can do, on a personal level, you can consult with us as frequently as you want. Like every time that your job requires you to make a decision that you think would impact this fictional experience, just touch base with your narrative designer, ask them would this fit within the fiction? Do you have any ideas on how we could do this, so that it increases the emotional experience of that. You can integrate your narrative designers in your approval processes, so you can have a little checking that requires a narrative designer to go through any proposals and check, yes, this is approved by us, this fits really well within the narrative, or have no, there's some feedback on here, obviously trying not to bog things down too much, but just to make sure that everything is going in the right direction. Even better if your narrative designer has the time, or narrative designers have the time to be integrated within the feature teams and can be there sitting in stand-ups and in presentations to actually be on the loop of everything that's happening. That would be even better. But it all comes down to mutual trust. I'm claiming here that I want the team to understand the narrative designer, but you need to understand your team just as much. If anything, from a purely professional standpoint, it's really important as a designer to understand what resources you have available and how to use them, right? The same way that an artist needs to know how many colors they have in their palette, you want to understand what team members you have, what are their limitations on the tech, what are they really, really good at? Are they incredible at 2D or are they better at 3D? What are their processes like? What are their pipelines like? If you understand all those things, not only can you make sure that you integrate all the elements better, you can also plan better if you understand their pipelines. If you understand how the mocap process works, for example, you can know exactly when to plan the work, the scripting work, for example, so that it fits perfectly within their pipelines. And as I think Lou said earlier, please trust your team. We're asking for their trust. You need to trust them as well. You are here the expert on narrative design. They will be the experts on their own disciplines. They will know the right call to make in each of their areas of expertise. So we spoke about the steps earlier, And I wanted to quickly run through what a narrative designer should do, more or less. Like, obviously, this is very reductive, in each of the stages of game production. So I'm going to talk about, like, in an ideal world, what responsibilities narrative designer would be expected to have. So hopefully everyone is familiar with the usual 3 stages of game production, although they sometimes go back and forth and back and forth. But we have conception, pre-production, and production. Conception, I would agree, is one of the most important ones. As we spoke about earlier, this is where you want to find that experience. This is where you want to really nail it down. And one of the big pitfalls of this is that people believe that they can just come up with a few game mechanics, and then when they're in production, bring over a narrative designer or a game writer and ask them to make sense of the story. That, I would highly advise against it. Because if you have a narrative designer from this stage, you will have better chances to have that experience, those core pillars of the game, much better solidified from this stage. How does this happen? So the first thing that you have to do as a narrative designer is understand the mandate, understand what is the experience that you're being asked to produce. Does this come from your company? Does this come from a client? Does this come from yourself? Like, are you an independent developer? You need to understand what is your target audience. What genre, like what game mechanics are you gonna use, and what are the target audience expectations on those game mechanics? Is it an already established IP, or are you creating a new IP? What is the core of that emotional experience if it's an established IP? You need to understand what you need to produce, what is your goal. And then you have to agree on that experience. Most of the time, and especially like this talk is for people that work in bigger teams, you're going to have many people working with you on this stage of the game that you will have to agree with on the experience. So usually you would propose a high-level experience. Usually you would propose several high-level experiences, and it would be like, no, 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 yes. And each no is very valuable because it tells you where not to go, and it narrows down where you have to arrive. As we said, you have to develop all the materials, all the documentations, all the presentations, have all the meetings to communicate your design effectively, and seek and digest the feedback from your game directors, your creative directors, the game designers, art directors, until everyone agrees on what this experience should be. And hopefully this will stay throughout the entire game. So you want to nail it down and not really skip this stage, because it can be really costly if you don't. In pre-production is where you would hopefully actually sit down and design all of the systems that will come together to simulate this experience. This is where you would want to think about how you're going to deliver any narrative or missions or dialogue. This is where you want to sit down with level design, with art direction, with sound direction, and start to plan out all of the things that you're going to develop to simulate that fictional experience. And hopefully this is where you establish a plan. Again, this is like a fantastic world of unicorns and happiness in which everything goes according to plan. And it's a lot more complicated than this, but this is like hopefully what should happen. And once you have a plan to execute on the science, it's good to try and prototype and test, maybe sometimes from conception even, but test as early as possible to check that the simulation you're going for is actually giving up that experience. And in production, that's where you actually develop and design the moment-to-moment content. So say that you are doubling up as a game writer, this is where you would write all the verbal assets. This is where you write all of the text, all of the UI, all of the items, all of the mission descriptions. This is where you write all of the dialogue. This is where you go to voice recordings, mocap recordings, implement all those assets. If you're also doubling as a mission designer or a content designer, this is also where you like develop items, develop missions, develop character arcs and like smaller stories. And this is where you actually create those assets and implement them. And hopefully you also stay in the loop with all the other disciplines to check that they're going in the right direction, that you agree, that they're still going for that fictional experience that everyone is hopefully on board with by now. And again, I cannot stress enough the importance of playtesting, not only yourself, so you can see how everything is coming together, but also really encourage your QA department, if you have one, if you have the privilege of having a really good QA department, to provide feedback on how the experience feels to them, not only provide technical feedback or feedback on game design, but also have a bit of a more subjective view, really empower them to give you all that feedback, because it's incredibly valuable. And if you can afford it, really do external playtest with your target audience, and pay a lot of attention to like the way that they receive the information, and polish until you run out of time and you have to ship. So hopefully by now you have a great game. So we reach our conclusions. Chapter 6, Beyond Words. So hopefully I've made it understandable that words is one of the very, very important elements that make up the fictional experience of a game, but it's only one of them. As narrative designers, we absolutely need to deal with words, and often we double up as game writers, and we absolutely need to literally do the words of the game. But our job really goes beyond words. Our job ensures that all of the elements that come together in the game create that fictional experience that's compelling and engaging and believable. And in order to achieve this, we need the collaboration of our entire team. So just a few notes at the end. This is more or less the skill set that I would recommend to any fictional designers. Definitely have the literal writing skill of finding the right words in the right order is going to be really important, even if you make a game that doesn't have any writing, because it's going to help you with your documentation, it's going to help you with your communication to the rest of the team. If you're planning to work on a game that has a story and a plot and characters, work on your plot design, work on the narrative structure, work on character design, and I don't mean like art character design, but the design of like their motivations, their background, and how they behave and how they interact with the player. World building design, create these speculative worlds, understand how themes and tone move the game forward. Understand, obviously, game design. Game design is one of the major skills that you have as a designer of any kind. Player psychology and empathy is essential to our job. In general, it's essential to every designer's job, but we need to have the more, say, emotional view of that, because what we're creating in the end is experiences that create an emotion. We need to understand systems design, of how to do a lot of designing systems for how to convey dialogue, for example. And it doesn't hurt to have an understanding. You don't need to be an expert, but you need to understand what level designers do, what combat designers do, what UI and UX design does, sound direction, art direction, production. If you understand the limitations of the tech that you're working with, it really helps. Really, nothing is, like in a curiosity for all things in general. Like when you're a narrative designer, you have to have a curiosity for literally anything and everything, because the game that you make could be about anything and everything. And just a final word of personal advice. Every single good designer that I've met has had a problem-solving approach. I've seen, and this is specifically narrative designers, I've seen narrative designers and writers just sit paralyzed, waiting for inspiration to come. That's a pitfall. That's not going to help you move forward. much better to approach narrative design like every other discipline of design. You're trying to find what are the problems and what are the best, most elegant solutions to tie everything together. It really pays off to be a flexible person, to not get too tied up, too attached to your own designs, because this, more than any other medium I know, will slap you constantly. You will find out new information left and right that will completely destroy your assumptions. And the longer you stay weeping for what you've lost, the longer it will take you to actually arrive at your solution. It pays off to, again, view everything as a problem that you have to solve, and that is the puzzle, that's the fun nugget of your job. And as I've said, like, our job requires us to provide a lot of direction. We're not directors, but we provide direction on what the fictional experience should be. And as Lou also said, I think the view of the author is really detrimental. I think the view of like everyone has to go exactly where I tell them doesn't work out most of the time. I prefer to think about it more as being a shepherd, not in the sense that your teammates are sheep, but in the sense that you're kind of like directing them, like giving them a sense of direction of where they need to go, but they open up the path for themselves and they can take you. You need to allow them to take you to places that you couldn't have imagined on your own. And everyone is kind of walking together. And again, I cannot stress enough the importance of trusting each other. You need the trust of your team, but you need to trust your team as well. You need the understanding of your team, but you need to understand your team as well. And if everyone was together, hopefully you make narrative designs beyond words. That's it. Any questions? Can I have a little bit of water? Sorry, perdona. Perdona.
Hi. I'm here. So thanks. First of all, thanks for the talk. I think it's really, really interesting. I'm not a narrative designer, but I work closely with my 2 narrative designers in a team of 3, which is funny. So, so thank you for it. And I wanted to ask you, do you think the narrative designer job is somewhat doubles also as emotional game design, something like that? I wanted to know your perspective about it, because I'm super into that. And even though I don't work as a narrative designer, I really would like to learn more about it. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. I think emotional game design is just one of the names for what we do. I think one of my favorite narrative design theories that I learned about kind of early on in my career is procedural rhetoric. Ian Boggust had this theory that one of the main languages that games in general, not just video games, have to convey something is the procedures and the game mechanics. Is one of my favorite topics. I think, have you played Brothers, A Tale of Two? In that game, you control each of the brothers. I've told this story so many times. You can control each of the brothers with one side of the remote. Sorry, the control, controller, not the remote. And spoilers, at one point, one of the brothers dies, and you literally feel his death in your arm. I feel like that's something that you cannot tell in any other medium. That's using the mechanics of the game to actually make you feel something. That's what I think we refer to when we speak about emotional game design. So that's definitely one of the many really cool things that we can do to create a fictional experience, for sure.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it very much. I'm also obsessed with all of this, and I wanted to ask you, I'm obsessed with all of what you were talking about. And I wanted to ask you, would you recommend any resources, books? Like, what are your favorites? What do you think is like de referencia?
I actually learned a lot about game design from YouTube. I learned about game design a lot from watching extra credits back in the day. A lot of like Mark Brown, Game Maker's Toolkit. Yesterday I was around Mark Brown and I was like completely starstruck. I've learned a lot because I'm like ADHD, all that stuff. Like visual learning really helps. When it comes to books, I really like the one I mentioned about Ian Bogost, in which he talks about procedural rhetorics. I can't remember the name of it right now. I think it's Persuasive Games. There's another one about, is it Espen? My God, I haven't brushed up on my literature in a while. What was it called again? Something about the expressiveness. Something about expressiveness. But it all, I can't remember the title right now, but it all touches upon that thing I was just talking about, how it's not just about the story, and like I really hate that divide between the story and the game mechanics. No, it's all the same. It all comes together. There's I think it's, oh my God, I should have brushed up on my on my books before this. I can tell you after the talk. I can look it up.
I will message you.
But yeah, I think I've learned a lot from watching YouTube and from reading. I think the mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics paper that's available online is just a little bit of, like, I think it's 6 pages or something like that. I've learned a lot from that. I think the internet has so many resources, even more now than when I started. You can find everything that you set out to find.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Hi, amazing talk. Thank you so much for giving it. So there's already an establishment that there's a lot of overlap between game design and narrative design. So any recommendations so that they two get along well in a team so that they don't feel like they're stepping in each other's turf? Like good synergies instead of like infighting or stuff like that? Any recommendations on that?
That mutual trust is the key. I've seen narrative designers that did not respect the job of the game designers, that thought that they were the ideas people, and the game designers were just the systems people. And that destroys it, and so is the other way around. I've also seen game designers that are like, oh, this is just the story people. Like, we are the actual owners of the game because we're the game designers. It's all about that, having that humility to say, I'm working with a lot of other people, and they know better than me in their aspects. I know better than them in my aspects, so hopefully you should. You can't work with people if you don't respect what they do. You need to be able to listen to them, and you need to be able to communicate what you do to them. If you have that higher seat at the table, you will never be able to work with people correctly. It's better for your job to be more humble. That's what I wish everyone understood in every side of the table.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you very much for your talk. It has been very inspiring. Well, my case is that I am not a narrative designer. I am just a programmer. I am trying to make a video game for the first time in my life. So, and the problem is that I am working on a visual novel, kind of. So basically, the narrative has a very big weight in the actual gameplay. The problem is that I am not any way related to this. We are using an IP that it's already there, and we are kind of converting that books into a video game. So I have half of the work made, but I would like to ask you about some specific advice for someone that is not a narrative designer at all and tries to kind of do that because I mean, in our team, it's me and my wife, just that. So it's we are trying to start our first video game. So we don't have resources to ask for a narrative designer, and we are trying to do everything on ourselves. So any advice on that?
So if I understand correctly, you're already working with a book, right? You're like trying to adapt from a book. So my advice would be take that book and understand why it resonates with you, why it resonates with people. What about it? What does it make you feel? And what elements does it use to make you feel that way? And how you can adapt those elements to an interactive medium. You don't need any text at all. Like one of the first few games I worked on was Gris, and one of the first few mandates I got is like, we don't want any text. We want to avoid even tutorials. We want to avoid them. And it still tells a really compelling story. You don't need any text at all. You don't need to be a good writer. Like, you don't need to have that skill of stringing words together to write, to do a game. But I'm guessing if you're already working with a book, you probably will need to adapt that. My advice is just start. It's like any other skill. Like if you're starting just you and your wife from scratch, you probably like have had to pick up a lot of skills on programming, on art, on design. It's one of those skills again. Just start very simple. Don't get in your head. Don't get too perfectionist. Just get something down, and you can always go back and polish it later on. But the core of it is understand what makes it work, and don't obsess about making it work on the text. Obsess about making it work in the mechanics, in everything that you see, and everything that you hear, and everything that you do. If it works there, the text, if it's not great, people will not care about it. If it's great, people will care about it, hopefully. But don't obsess over it. Just do something, and get it down, and listen to what people tell you. If people tell, and when it comes to narrative design, a lot is about being understandable. I think a lot of game writers and narrative designers try to like write something really cool, and it's not great if people are playing your game and they don't understand what you mean. So just keep it very simple, and pay attention to the moments where your playtesters are like, what do you mean by that? I don't know what to do. Pay attention to those moments. Those are the moments I really want to nail down, and everything else it's just a layer on top. But if you have the core down, it's going to be okay.
Thank you very much.
No worries. All good? Okay, thank you so much.